I am so thrilled because I can't make out if you are more passionate about teaching or about learning languages, which
Ooh,
is
that's a
awesome.
very difficult choice. I think it's a combination of both, probably. I think. Yeah, it's probably the combination of both. So yeah, that I enjoy the most. Yeah, because I think as a teacher, it's very interesting to be a student, as a language teacher, to be a language student yourself, to understand, to not forget how difficult it is to learn a language, especially when you're a beginner. I just started with Greek, and I'm frustrated because it's not advancing. So I have a student who is not advancing in Dutch, and so I remain patient. I don't have any problem explaining something 5 times. Sometimes I have to explain something 5 times, and it helps because I find myself in the same situation as that student, because I'm starting a new language and I'm frustrated because it's not advancing. It's not going fast enough for me, or I have issues, or I'm forgetting things.
Yeah.
And it helps, for me personally, it helps me a lot when I'm a student myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love on your website, you have this
Mm-hmm.
quote, which is everyone is always simultaneously a student and a teacher. And
Yeah,
this
that's
is
true.
so beautiful.
Yeah, because actually, yeah, I learn a lot from my students, not necessarily in the same capacity. They're not teaching me their language, even though sometimes they explain me stuff about their language. But I learn a lot of stuff about their culture, about their history, the history of their country, gastronomy, all kind of stuff. Yeah, they teach me.
Yeah.
They teach me stuff about their country in the language we're studying. So as a student, as a teacher, you're always a student, because you're learning stuff. You don't. There are a lot of things I don't know about Hungary, for example. But I have a student from Hungary, and every time she explains me, oh yes, on Easter we do this, for Christmas we do this, on holiday we take holidays then, and we go there. Yeah, you have to be very receptive. Yeah, you have to accept that the students are going to teach you stuff every time, every lesson. I learn something new. Sometimes I wonder who is learning the most. Are they learning the language that I'm teaching them, or am I learning at the end of a lesson? I have a lot of new information, and I feel like, okay, I'm getting a lot back from my students, even though they are paying me to teach them, to help them with their language. They are also they're paying me not only with money, but also with knowledge. So I feel like I'm in a very lucky position, because I'm getting paid for something I love doing. Plus, my students give something from their life also to me.
Yeah. It seems to me that I have made the wrong career, right?
You can always change. I've only been in this kind of position for a few years now. Before I was doing other stuff that I didn't like. Now I feel like I'm doing something that I love.
Yeah.
So, and I've published this on social media. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and I think, I really don't want to work. Like a lot of people, of course, say that, I don't want to go to work. I don't want to start my day. I would like to be on holiday. But then every time the same thing. I start teaching. I see my student. We start talking.
Mm.
And after that lesson, I have way more energy than before. I feel like, okay, my students give me energy because, of course, I'm doing something I love. Even though before I seem to have forgotten that I love teaching, then I start, and then I find my passion immediately back, not only because I love teaching, but also because my students are sometimes I think most of my students are somewhere in between students and friends. Of course, they're not friends, they're paying me, and we're studying something together. But sometimes I feel like I know them better than some people I would consider my friends. Because when you have a student, so I have some students I have 3 times a week, an hour. I don't have anyone in my life I see, except for my dogs. I see more than I see 3 hours a week. And in 3 hours, of course, you cannot talk for an hour about COVID. Yeah, you could talk about COVID or the war in Ukraine.
Not.
You start talking about things that happen in your life. What did you do yesterday? And a lot of my students, they start sharing very personal stories, things that have happened during the week, or bad things that have happened. Because I think also this is a one-to-one setting, so they feel safe. I don't hit the record button, so what they say to me, it stays in my head. I don't spread it around, so they feel a bit safe. So they're actually practicing a language, but also sharing their problems or their passions or whatever, which is a very great thing, according to me, because a language you have to use for a lot of things. Talking about COVID, talking about how you prepare a Spanish tortilla, but also about sometimes the problems in your life.
And do you think that feeling comfortable with a teacher, is this like the most important thing, sort of, that when you are open, when you are free to speak, that's the way when you are progressing the most, maybe?
Yeah, I think the most important thing in a language teacher is you feel at ease with your teacher and you're not afraid to make mistakes. You just tell what you think. And a lot of people, why do people choose a teacher and not like a language exchange? Because a teacher is supposed not to judge you because you're making a mistake, and not going to say, oh, that's wrong, that's wrong. No, you as a teacher, you're going to explain why it is wrong, why it is a mistake, and together try to avoid the same mistake in the future. And the most important thing, to feel at ease and to make mistakes, because we all learn from our mistakes, is when you can connect with a teacher. You have to create a connection, and that's not only interesting for the student, but also for the teacher. For me, it's very interesting if I connect with the student. If I feel like, okay, this is a lesson or a person I look forward to. I look forward to the lesson. I'm really, some students of mine, I'm like, oh yes, today I have this student, this is going to be a nice afternoon. So, and I think that's the most important thing. That's why some people, especially in online teaching, you have to try out different teachers. Sometimes you're lucky. For example, when I started with Catalan, the first teacher was a hit. I've had 50 lessons with him. I think I could stop now with lessons because my level is okay. I can have a conversation. I have a good level, but I continue with him because I sincerely like talking to the person.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most important thing. And sometimes you have to trial and error. When you're looking for a teacher, you have to look for someone who you think, okay, I can connect with this person. We have the same interests. I like the way this person teaches. And sometimes that's not easy. For Brazilian Portuguese, I had to try out 3 different teachers, and then in the end, okay, I found one. But sometimes it takes a while. I think for Danish, I've had 5 teachers, for example.
I see.
The important thing, I think, is, especially if it's one-to-one, is you feel at ease. You think, okay, I'm looking forward to my lessons. And that's important for the teacher, but also for the students.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how do you go about it? I mean, when you are looking for a new teacher in a language that you're learning, do you write a message in which you explain how you would like to have the lesson, or how exactly do you go about it?
Yeah. So I always send. So I first look and check if there's someone I think, okay, maybe this is an interesting person, but it's very difficult, I think, to judge based on a short video or a profile or reviews. But most reviews are raving reviews, but everybody learns in a different way. So I'm looking for something specific, something that's good for me, that fits my profile. And I always send a message where I explain where I'm at, what level, and what I'm looking for. I'm mostly looking to reach a level where I can have a good conversation with a person. I don't focus on how to write, because the most languages I use to communicate with other people. But I do the same thing as a teacher myself. When somebody books a lesson, a first lesson, I always reach out. I ask, what are you looking for? What's your level? How can I help you? And I have my own web page that I send to the new student, and where I explain already, this is how I teach. just to let the student know.
And yeah, let's talk a little bit about Greek. You mentioned that you were learning Greek, and I wonder what motivates you to learn Greek.
So I like the country, I like the cuisine, I like the people, and for sure I'm going to visit the country many times in the future. So that's one motivation, of course. I will be able to use it. On the other hand, I love seeing and discovering the connections between languages. That's why I love Catalan so much, because I see sometimes it feels a bit like Italian, sometimes a bit like Spanish, sometimes a bit like French. I see the connections, and that's something I love discovering while studying. And Greek is a fantastic language because it has influenced a lot of languages, English, Italian, Spanish, German. So often I discover a lot of things that I thought, okay, these words are from Italian and they come probably from Latin, but in the end they turn out to come from Greek, from ancient Greek, and they survive until today. So I love studying it because I continue, every time I discover stuff, connections between Greek and other languages. It's amazing how strongly Greek has influenced English, for example. I didn't know that before I started studying the language. And another motivation is because it's another alphabet, and that might take me, it's not that different from the alphabet that other Indian European languages, but still it's different, so I have to make an extra effort. And that might take me one day also to start a language that has a completely different alphabet. I tried with Japanese in the past, but I gave up because I lost motivation due to a myriad of reasons. But this might be a step for me. Okay, this is a bit more difficult than other languages for me, and that might be, for me, a step that will take me to another language that has another alphabet, a way more difficult alphabet. I don't know, Thai or... But yeah, Japanese is still on my language bucket list, so it might be Japanese one day.
So it's all about making connections, because another example, a great example I find is your website, which is called something polyglot.com. And I believe that poly comes also from the Greek. I think polu.
My knowledge of Greek is not that, I'm still at A1 level, so I don't know what poly, I thought poly probably means multiple or something, if I have to guess. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, you can use it for other languages. Another example is aphasia, because, you know, Bruce Willis, he has aphasia, which is a disease in the brain, and you can't communicate. Yeah, it's an awful disease. And for example, A means not, and phasia or phasia means to utter or to speak.
Yeah.
So with this knowledge, you can guess a lot of other stuff or assume, and
yeah,
it's
amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing. At the same time, it makes it also easier to learn the language, because you have something to hold on to.
Yeah.
Because you already, I think, so people say often, for a polyglot or somebody who speaks multiple languages, it becomes easier. Well, learning a language is easy. I totally disagree, because I'm struggling with Greek now. So it's not easier. But what becomes easier is that you see often connections. You can use the information you know from one language, because the word is similar, to learn another language, and that makes it becomes easier to learn another language. For me, for example, Greek is probably easier because I speak German. And in German, you have accusative and genitive also. And in Greek, those exist also. So I don't have to rewire my brain and understand what is an accusative, what is a genitive, because I already know it. So what becomes easier is because of those connections between the languages. It goes a bit, I don't say it's not easier, it goes a bit faster, I imagine, for somebody like me who speaks multiple languages. I think that's the advantage when you speak multiple languages. There is a new language, and then you see the connections. Of course, when I'm going to start with, if I retry Japanese, it won't be, probably it won't make a big difference that I speak other languages, because there are little or probably no connections between Japanese and the languages I speak.
See. And what I find interesting is that even though you are a polyglot and you know several languages really well, but at certain points you struggled, I believe, when it comes to speaking some languages, because you just didn't have the opportunity, or you didn't practice the speaking part of the language. Is that true?
So nowadays I feel a bit more at ease to practicing languages or classes, but in the past, for example, Catalan, I started and I waited for 8 months before I took my first lesson. So I had been studying it without speaking it.
Yeah.
So as an introvert, it's a bit more difficult to leave your comfort zone and start speaking and using the language. But you might also refer to the fact that sometimes it's difficult. I speak Danish, I study Danish, but I have never spoken the language outside of my italki classes, because I've never met a person who speaks Danish. So I live in Madrid, and probably there are Danish people in Madrid, but I haven't met them. And on the internet, so there are a few languages. For example, Catalan is a very easy language to find people who want to help you. Catalan people really want to help you. They're available and they reach out to you.
Okay.
They send me messages. Yeah, if you need help, no problem. For other languages, it's a bit the same, maybe sometimes a bit less. But for certain languages, it's a bit more difficult. Danish, yeah, there are only 5 million native speakers. So there are not many people. And many of them probably don't find it. Yeah, what I hear sometimes from some countries like the Netherlands, Denmark, if you say, okay, I'm studying your language, and then they say, why? Everybody speaks English here. While in other countries, like in people who live in regions or countries where Catalan is spoken, they feel more like they're very much supported. They say, thank you for learning my language. And as such, they also want to help you. And then it's easier to find people. I have language exchange. I've been to Barcelona recently, and I met people and I spoke for an entire day in Catalan. That would be way more difficult if I were to go to Denmark. I don't know anyone in Denmark. So, and the problem is often, if you do go to a country where the level of English is very high, and then, like in my home country, in the northern part, most people speak English. In the Netherlands, in the northern countries, Scandinavian countries, so they hear you are a foreigner and immediately they switch to English, and you don't get the opportunity to practice the language. And then you have to be very assertive to say, no, I want to speak your language. If you're a bit insecure, if you're afraid of making mistakes, then you switch to English and you don't advance. Yeah.
Do you have some tips maybe for the introvert persons out there who want to speak more often maybe, but they just don't get the chance, or they are timid? And because I consider myself to be an introvert, so sometimes I struggle a lot.
Yeah, it's this is very, very difficult, I think, because if you want to practice speaking, you have to speak. And the problem for an introvert is the speaking part is out of our comfort zone. So you have to leave your comfort zone. And that's not easy. But because how do you leave your comfort zone? By forcing yourself to leave that zone. The only thing I can tell from my own experience, every time it gets a bit easier. Because I'm now in a podcast, this is out of my comfort zone. But I feel rather at ease. Why do I feel at ease? Because I've done this the past 6 months, 4 times. This is the 4th time, it's get easier. And this is the same with, I think, with every activity you don't like doing or you don't want to do. So you have to force yourself, find a way to leave your comfort zone. For some people, I think it might help if you reach out to someone you know a little bit. So I'm very active on Twitter. I know people. And it's way easier for me to say, okay, let's have a chat. Let's do a language exchange. I know you a bit. For example, when I started having online lessons. I didn't know. I was very nervous, out of my comfort zone, way out of my comfort zone. So what did I do? There was someone on Twitter who is an Italki teacher who teaches French, a language that I'm a teacher. I teach French, so I didn't really need lessons, but I had a French lesson with that teacher, with that person that I knew a little bit in a language that I know. So it's like leaving your comfort zone, but still, I was still standing with one foot in my comfort zone. And for me, it's easier to leave slowly my comfort zone than to jump out of my comfort zone. Same thing with, this, for example, is out of my comfort zone, but it's easy because I've done it a few times. So the more you do something, the easier it becomes sometimes, not always. And I think that's a bit the problem for an introvert, because the first time you do something, you're nervous, you start sweating, you might not sleep the day before. And the second time, it might be the same or even worse. But then maybe the third time, the fourth time, it gets easier. I've had 1,700, I think, lessons on Italki this year, in 1 year. And when I have a new student, I'm still nervous. But I'm less nervous than 6 or 7 months ago, because I have been doing it on a regular basis. Almost every week I have a new student. And it becomes easier. And it's the same with when you're learning a language, you want to practice it, but you're a bit introvert, then you have to force yourself to do it. And it sounds easier than it is, because I've been there. You're nervous. You start sweating. You want to cancel even before you say, "Oof, no, I'm going to send a message that I'm sick. I don't want to do it." But you have to go through with it. You have to. There's no easy solution. There's no way as an introvert, if you're not used doing. There's no easy way. You'll be nervous. You have to accept. Before you do it, you have to accept that you're going to be nervous. You have to accept and you go for it, because I've never ever had a negative experience with leaving my comfort zone. I was nervous. I might not have even slept the day before when I left my comfort zone. But it was negative, because afterwards, often you feel very I've done something that I thought was impossible. And that's very powerful, because afterward, then you think, okay, I've done this once, and then we're going to try it again. But I know it's easier said than done, because I was there hiding in my comfort zone.
And you also mentioned Twitter. So I stumbled upon the hashtag language Twitter. I think it's lang and then TWT. Yeah.
That's it.
And
that's right.
Maybe you could explain what it is all about.
So Twitter is like the world, and LANGTWT is like a village. So with Twitter, you can connect with the entire world. If you want to talk to just a part of the world, just your village, that language village where we talk about languages, then you use that hashtag and you reach people who have a similar interest. I would call it like a sub-community. A sub-community that I found very much a positive community. Twitter is often a very negative community where people attack other people because they have a different opinion, but like in politics. I'm left, you're right, and we don't talk to each other, we yell to each other. While in this case, these are people who share the same passion or interest, languages, language learning, and they talk to each other, share stories, share research, reach out to each other. I want to start Vietnamese. Who studies Vietnamese here? It's a small community, so it's easier to reach those people that can help you. So I used Twitter in the past more. I studied political science, so I have an interest in politics, and I used Twitter to follow people, journalists, stuff related to politics. And for 5 years, I didn't use Twitter because it was too negative. It's very negative. I think we should raise the taxes. I think we should lower the taxes, and people start yelling. People don't listen to each other. While with LANGTWT, it's more helping each other, supporting each other. There are some negative sides also, because sometimes people feel bit of failure because they haven't studied. People also share their progress, and that can. But the other side, there are also people who share their struggles. I sometimes say, oh, yeah, I didn't do anything this week, or personally in this few weeks I'm going to something personal, a rough patch, and I'm not able to study. So I share that. I tell you, okay, this is life. Sometimes you have ups and downs, and language learning is the same. So I think, yeah, I found this something very positive because I've met people through this hashtag, like digital, almost digital friends. It has helped me also because I've made. I find it very difficult to say friends, but some people like if the people who I talk to on Twitter would live in the same city, I would meet up with them probably once a week, grab a coffee or a beer, and I know we would probably become friends because we share. I know them because we have been talking for over. Some people I talk to every day, so they feel a bit like friends, digital friends.
But you mean talking via Zoom, or do you mean
No, I feel really on Twitter we share. Somebody shares something, and then there's the advantage. The big difference between something like Instagram and Twitter is on Twitter you can have a conversation. Somebody publishes something, somebody else responds, and another person responds, and you start talking. And you have a conversation, a short conversation. But that can lead to something more. You can say, okay, in the private messages, do you want to chat? I've had people who reached out to me, I want to chat with you about my language learning. I've had somebody who was in difficulty and had lost his passion, and then we chatted for an hour on Zoom or on Skype. So it can lead to something more. I've had language exchanges thanks to Twitter. People who we did then a language exchange, and I met up with people I've met on Twitter. A few of them live in Barcelona. I actually went to Barcelona to meet these people because I wanted to meet some people I had been talking to on the internet for months, which confirmed also my idea that I would easily, I think, become friends. I don't know if they want to be friends with me in real life, but I know that I like these people. I like talking to these people. It's easy to talk to these people because I know them. We have to share the same interests, and I could easily become friends with these people.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. And to me, sometimes it's dangerous because you start scrolling and you see something fantastic and there is no end, right? So sometimes maybe I should just take some time from looking at my mobile phone. But it's with everything, right? So we shouldn't blame Twitter on that. Everyone is responsible.
Yeah. I think for me, I'm now, the pandemic is now, I think, somewhat under control. So it's time for me also to spend less time online and more offline. So I'm trying to build my social life here in Madrid, the city where I live, and what less on the internet. I think you have to, it's a bit like language. Some people exaggerate, I think. I know a few people, I think, oof, you're doing a lot, you're studying a lot. I also come from a period, a few months, where I've studied a lot. So now, actually, for a few reasons, I've actually decided to reduce, to try to focus on 2 languages. Before, I was focusing on 6 or 7 languages. Every week, I was doing something for all these languages, and it was a bit too much. And I think for an introvert, languages are also a very safe environment because it's something you can do on your own. You can take a book and start studying without using it. You can study a language without using it, of course. That's what I also did in the past. And for an introvert, it might be a very safe environment because, you don't have to leave your comfort zone. I think for many people, like, digital friends are easier friends because you don't have to meet them on Twitter. You have time to think. In real life, you don't have time. Somebody asks you and you have to answer. On Twitter, you can, what I'm going to write, and then people, I'm not going to publish it. In real life, of course, you have to talk immediately. You have to give an answer. You don't really have time. I think that's a bit the fear that many people have, because when you have so I speak Catalan, and when I have a lesson, I make some mistakes. I make 5 times during the same lesson because I don't have time to think.
Yeah.
But when you are alone and you're studying, you have an exercise, or you want to write something, you can look up things. You're in a very safe environment. You don't make mistakes, and I think you make less mistakes. You have more time to think. For a lot of people, that's safer than, for example, speaking, because when you speak, you make more mistakes. In Italian, you have a very beautiful saying that I keep on using a lot, even when I'm not teaching Italian: Sbagliando si impara. While making mistakes, you learn. You learn from your mistakes. That's what it means. So, in my opinion, as a teacher, it's way more interesting to make mistakes, and then somebody tells you, no, it's wrong, it should be this. Then, when you yourself are writing something, doing something, and you look it up. And because most of the times we use the language when we're speaking, and you don't have time to think. But if you really want to advance in language, I think you have to speak the language, because then everything comes a bit together. You're in the moment. You don't have a lot of time to think. You have to look for all the information. And I think then you realize often what your real level in a language is. I think somewhere on my social media is something written like, speaking is when magic happens in language learning. Because then a lot of things come together. The knowledge you know, and sometimes you discover that you know more than you thought.
Yeah.
I had a lesson a few weeks ago, Danish. After 2 weeks, I hadn't studied Danish, and I was surprised. Oh, I remember this word. I still remember this word. So sometimes speaking is not only to advance, but also to realize what you know. And I think some people who don't practice a language, so they might be surprised what they're capable of, but some people underestimate their knowledge. And when they start using the language, sometimes they're surprised. A bit like when you're studying for an exam and you think, I don't know. And then you see the question and you say, yes, I remember, and you start writing, which is great for your self-esteem, because it's also something related to leaving your comfort zone. When you leave your comfort zone, very often your self-esteem goes up. Not only because you're strong enough to leave your comfort zone, but also because you see the results.
Absolutely. I don't know if I remember that correctly, but I think that you said on the interview on the Language Come Up channel, you said something that you were a perfectionist, or maybe I didn't got that right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm a perfectionist.
So
definitely.
Is it difficult then? I mean, you're learning several languages at the same time, and being a perfectionist can maybe easily burn you out, or...
Yeah, I'm a perfectionist, but maybe I should say I used to be a perfectionist, because I think, just as I would say I used to be a complete introvert, because I don't think I'm a complete introvert anymore. I used to be a complete perfectionist. So I think I'm old. I'm 38 years old, so I have my history, and I can see that I'm moving away from those positions, because life teaches me that perfectionism doesn't help you. It's impossible. You cannot be perfect. Perfect is also boring. If everything were perfect, if my knowledge of Catalan were perfect, I would stop probably. So I think many people are perfectionists and think, okay, this helps, this motivates me to improve, which is something positive. The problem is, if you're a perfectionist, your standards are very high. Your standards are impossible. And I think I've moved away from that. And I feel when I'm speaking a language, I still feel, whenever I feel a mistake, I feel like, oh, I made a mistake. It's not good enough. But I've also learned to keep on making mistakes, to continue, to accept. Sometimes I feel ridiculous when I'm speaking a language, when I make the same mistake for the 5th time, but I continue. And I think the most important thing is just to, even if you're an introvert or if you're a perfectionist, just to go for it and to continue, even though it's not always easy. I've been in the position where I was 95% introvert or 95% perfectionist. It's not easy, but you have to take maybe small steps.
I can imagine. But you being a teacher, a language teacher, so does it shine through that you are an introvert person, or in other words, does your style vary from, let's say, from another teacher who is very extrovert? Can we make out a difference, or you could also just explain a little bit about your teaching style?
So I keep on saying I'm an introvert. I keep on saying I'm timid. I keep on saying I'm a perfectionist, and often I get the answer back, "Oh, I would never have thought that you're an introvert." I had an interview with a teacher from my talkie, teacher Ryan, and I published the link, and then I wrote, even though I'm an introvert and timid, I did this. I left my comfort zone because somebody asked me to talk about languages. And then we had talked for an hour, I think, and then he wrote to me, I would never have guessed you were an introvert. So I think I'm not that kind of not as introvert as in the past, but I think also I'm maybe able to hide it a bit, and also it's way easier to leave your comfort zone if people ask you to do something you like. I love talking about languages. I love talking about language learning. So this is like, yes, I don't care. I'll jump out of my comfort zone because somebody asked me to talk about something I love talking about. Is my teaching style different from somebody who's an extrovert? Probably. But I think everyone has his own teaching style. I think maybe for me, it's easier to connect with a person who's also an introvert. I have a few students and I feel like they feel at ease because I tell them, okay, I'm an introvert. I have difficulties. I did this. I give them also, sometimes they share their stories, their difficulties, and then I give my advice based on my experience. I think an introvert often feels at ease when they know that the teacher is also an introvert. Because then they say, okay, this person will understand me better than somebody who is not an introvert. Something similar, I think, I have a few gay students, and I think some students choose me because I'm gay, because they feel more at ease with a gay person. Which, I don't know if they choose me for that reason or they chose me for that reason the first time. But I think for some people, especially when you're introvert, maybe it's easier to connect with people who are similar, I think. I don't know. You should ask every single student. It's very important, especially when you want one-to-one, when you have one student, one teacher, the connection between the teacher and the student is important. And every person learns in another way. Every person looks for something specific, something unique. We're all unique. Every student is unique. Every teacher is unique. And you have to find, this is a bit like Tinder.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tinder, where the student and where the student and the teacher actually choose each other. Because they say, okay, I feel at ease with this person and I feel at ease with this person. Let's learn together. Because often it's not about teaching, it's about, I also explain, we're learning together. Because everybody learns in a different way. So the teacher also has to know how to teach that particular student. Every teacher has his own style, or has their own style, but every student is also different. So what makes my profession or my situation where you teach one-on-one challenging is that you have to adapt your teaching style every time to every student. Makes it interesting and challenging at the same time.
I like that, And once I remember that I wanted to have a lesson in Italian, and I reached out to the teacher and I wrote him that I wanted to speak, even though I was at the beginner level. So, but I just wanted to speak, right? This was for me the most important thing. And then the lesson began and the teacher would just make like a monologue, and then I explained that I wanted to speak because in my opinion, even if I am a beginner, I can have a lesson by just babbling together, right? Because this is what I need. Because if I wanted to have like a monologue, then I can listen to podcasts, and I really wanted to speak, but it didn't match because the teacher he told me that I needed the basics, but I wanted the basics by having a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a bit like what I told before, the trial and error. When you're
Exactly.
looking for a teacher. If you send the teacher a message, I want to speak, and then you don't speak. I've heard this before. Somebody recently told me she was looking for a German teacher. She wrote, I want to speak German. She had some basics, and the lesson was almost completely in English. Yeah. So if the teacher doesn't listen to you, then you look for another one. You look for another teacher. This is the trial and error. You might be lucky and then find somebody who is a complete match, or you might not be your lucky day, and you will have to look for somebody else. I think that's the reason why it's important when you're looking for someone, there is communication beforehand. That's why I always send a link with my webpage where I've published, this is my teaching style, that people know already this is how I teach. And if they don't like something, they tell me. I had one student recently who told me, no, because I use a Google document and I write stuff down. And she told, no, that's too much pressure for me. I just want to have a conversation. So I adapted. I didn't use a Google document during the lesson, but I sent her a Google document with some tips and mistakes afterwards. So this is very important as a student to be assertive enough to say, okay, maybe you like a teacher, but something is not going well. So send a message. A lot of teachers are very, accept criticism, especially when you say what you want. I told my Greek teacher, we had a lesson and too much grammar. So I wrote, sorry, but it was too much grammar. I would like to have more conversation. And the next lesson, my teacher adapted his style to what I asked. But if you don't have that communication, then things are going to get wrong.
Yeah.
Because it's very difficult if you have a new student immediately to understand, okay, what does this student want after half an hour?
Yeah.
Even sometimes I don't have a good idea the level. Because the first lesson, some students are a bit nervous, and when you're nervous, your level sometimes is a bit lower. You make more mistakes, and then sometimes it takes 3-4 lessons when I have like, okay, this is the level, there are the issues, but it helps also when the student tells, okay, this is my issue, I want to work on this. So, and there I try to ask questions to find out what the student wants, but if the teacher doesn't ask you questions, you can always reach out and tell, okay, this is what I want. Of course, if the teacher doesn't listen to you and you tell, I want conversation, and there's no conversation, then it's not going to be a match probably, and you should maybe look for another teacher or explain again, depending on, if you want to continue or not with that person.
Yeah, and let's transition to another topic, because I think you are also an avid podcast listener.
Yeah, that's right. I listen to podcasts every day.
I think it's an amazing way also to learn languages. So maybe you could tell us about one of your favorite podcasts and maybe how you use them to learn a language.
Yeah. So, well, my favorite podcast is actually a podcast I don't use for language learning, but could be interesting for other people. There's Wake Up, I think Wake Up to Money, it's called, from the BBC. I don't have a big knowledge about the economy, and there they explain things that are going on in the world related to the economy. Why could this podcast be, for example, interesting? It's always the same person who presents. So a person often uses the same expressions, vocabulary. So the vocabulary, the expressions repeat, the idioms, the phrasal verbs repeat themselves. You get exposure, and this is how we learn a language. If you hear every morning the same phrasal verb, the same idiom, eventually you're going to pick it up. But this is something, I don't really use it. I teach English, so it's interesting also. It's for me, it's interesting, but I don't really use it to learn a language. But I think for podcasts, especially if you're not specifically looking for podcasts that are made for learners, when you have a certain level, it's interesting to have authentic material. The most important thing is to find something you find interesting. I'm interested in everything related to self-help. So when I started studying Catalan, I looked for a podcast on that subject. And then you have two birds with one stone, because you're learning something interesting in a language you're studying. So I think the most important thing is to find something you find interesting. It's a bit the same with when you're studying a language and one chapter is on, I don't know, football, and you're not into football. Yeah, skip it, because you're not going to use that vocabulary in your day-to-day life. You're probably not going. I'm not going to talk about football with anyone, because I'm not interested. I'm not going to study the vocabulary. If you're not into cooking, yeah, it's probably not so interesting to know the difference between certain ways to cook vegetables. Focus on things that you know you find interesting and you know you're going to use. The same thing with podcasts. Choose something you're interested in, because if you're interested in something, it will be way more easier to continue. It will be easier to listen to something for half an hour. If you're not interested in the subject, skip it. Choose material. This is a mistake I made in the past. I had a book, an Asimil book, and there was a chapter on how to fix a car. And I studied it. But I have no interest in car. I don't know how to fix a car in my native language. So why did I study the vocabulary in Brazilian Portuguese on fixing a car? So skip the material. Just look for something you're interested in. The same with podcast. Look for something you're interested in.
Is it easy to find, let's say, a podcast in Afrikaans or Greek?
Yeah. Well, Greek, I don't know, because I don't have. I have a very low level. For some languages, it's more challenging. Danish, for example, is a real challenge. I found something now for my level, but it's one thing. Afrikaans, I have one podcast I've been listening to. The advantage is with Afrikaans, my native language is Dutch, so I could listen to the radio. I could listen to whatever podcasts, because I can understand everything, because it's very close to my native Dutch. But for example, Danish, I have difficulties finding material. I cannot listen to the radio. I cannot listen to the news, because I can understand kind of what they're talking about, but it's too difficult to enjoy it. Catalan is easy peasy, because I can use my knowledge of other languages to fill in the gaps from the start, actually. For some languages, it's more challenging to find material. Of course, if you're studying English or French or German even, there's a lot of people are studying this language spoken by many people, so there's a lot of material available. Afrikaans, if you're looking for material that you can use when you're learning the language and your level is low, it's very challenging to find something. Your options are limited.
Could you imagine to produce your own podcast?
That's an interesting question. This is an interesting question because I'm actually considering my own podcast, because my native language is Dutch, but in its Belgian variety. Some people call it Flemish, but we usually call it just Dutch or Belgian Dutch. And there's not a lot of material available. So when you're studying Dutch, I think 90% is the Dutch from the Netherlands. The Dutch that is spoken in the Netherlands with that accent, with the vocabulary they use. Now, the differences are not so big, but there are differences, and there is no material. Especially podcasts, maybe 2 or 3. So my idea at the moment, I'm creating my own project, making a podcast for intermediate students with exercises to have kind of a side project to my teaching, because my teaching is my thing, my cup of tea. This is what I imagine now, and never say never, but I'm going to do this till I retire, and maybe after I've retired, because I love doing this, so I might continue. But I'm considering my side project where I create my own podcast with transcripts and then exercises, to have like a side project next to my teaching.
Yeah. And do you have a name in mind already?
So I think last year I started a new Instagram account where I used what's called Vlaams onder onsje, which would be like a Flemish date or some in Dutch. Because my idea was, okay, to publish something every day related to Flemish. But yeah, it's not where my heart is. I've always been a radio lover. I studied actually radio journalism at university. So I think I might use that name for the podcast. I don't know. I'll see how it goes. I tried Instagram and publishing every, but I didn't feel a connection. So I think it might be a podcast. It might be an idea for something I think I might enjoy, but again, it's out of my comfort zone. So this would mean again that I have to leave my comfort zone, because listening to my own voice is not something I enjoy, and it's there's perfection. I'm a perfectionist, so fear of failure.
Yeah,
so this is
but
again.
you're used to it now, to get out of your comfort zone. So,
Oof, yeah.
so
Yeah,
you have
well,
to get going.
yeah, yeah. Maybe I'm used to it, but it's still not easy. Just like learning a new language is not easy. Maybe it gets easier, but it's still not easy. So I have to make an effort. I have to force myself. So now again, I'll probably have to force myself to start a podcast, and maybe I'll fail, maybe it will be a success, and then I'll transfer, and then afterwards I might continue, or I might do something else.
Do you have any favorite expression?
Yeah. The first one that comes to mind is actually in Catalan, because it was the first expression I learned in Catalan. It's called tocat del bolet. In English, that would mean touched by the mushroom. And when you're touched by the mushroom, you're a bit crazy. Because in the past, so people who ate these a long time ago, people who ate these mushrooms in somewhere in one of the regions where Catalan is spoken, they started behaving crazy. So probably there was some substance in the mushrooms that people started behaving crazy or a bit high. And that's why they have the expression tocat del bolet, touched by the mushroom.
That is cool. Unfortunately, I am not speaking that language, but it sounds funny. Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah, not yet. Who knows?
So,
Who knows?
Thank you very much, Kenny. It was really cool. And maybe you want to tell us where people can find you, where they can maybe take lessons with you.
Well, the easiest thing is just my website, somethingpolyglot.com, and there you have links to my italki profile, but also my social media. So if anyone wants to reach out, no problem, I always answer.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Kenny.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
Before I started learning Spanish, I never really understand the idea of learning another language. It was because it's me now, I realize all the things I don't know. So I always focus on the things that I don't know how to do. And that was not something that I realized before, that other people are going through who are learning English or something like that. It gives you a lot more respect for anyone who's learned another language, because just because you can have a conversation about some things, there might be completely other topics that are just off limits, like there is for me. You know, I'm always struggling with the language, but I'm so happy that I can do the things that I can do now, like get to know people or ask for help and things.